Well, here we are back again for lesson 6 of our Preparing for Israel course. This will be our final lesson. So far, we have discussed physical, mental, and spiritual preparation for your trip. We've talked about what to bring. We've explored how to understand the cultural experiences and issues you will encounter. We've also summarized Israel's history and how it arrived at where it is today. In this lesson, we're finally going to talk about how to interpret what you see on your tour. After all, the Bible sites and artifacts are the primary reason why you're going. You want to be in those places where important events happen, see the items used by people in Bible times, and experience what it was like to walk where Joshua, Deborah, David, Isaiah, and Jesus walked. To get you ready, I'm going to take you on a virtual tour of Israel at the end of this lesson. But before we do that, I need to make you aware of the fact that there are different viewpoints about how to interpret the Bible and the evidence that it's left behind for us to see on our trip. Much of the interpretation on your tour will depend upon the point of view of your tour leaders and the Israeli and Arab guides that they employ. I believe Bible interpretation boils down to 3 simple questions. First, how much trust should we put in the Bible's accuracy? In other words, is it true history of actual people and events, or is it just a collection of ancient myths, legends, and moral codes? Second, have the Bible manuscripts or copies of its original books been faithfully passed down to us? In other words, have there been any copy mistakes or changes in the Bible since the books were originally written? And third, does the Bible have any relevance or authority for our thinking, choices, and actions today? Or is it just an outmoded book that we don't need anymore? These questions are absolutely vital. The answers to these questions will color everything you see and experience on your tour. I'll tell you a quick story that I think will drive this point home. On our second trip to Israel, our tour leader, who had been to Israel many, many times, was highly knowledgeable about Israel. He was a committed believer concerning the Bible's truthfulness and accuracy. On this trip, he, for some reason, wasn't able to hire his usual Israeli guide, so he was given a replacement. The replacement was a woman who had migrated to Israel from Britain and gone through the training to become a guide. But she made it clear from the very beginning of our tour that she thought the Bible was a load of nonsense. Sometimes she would stand beside our tour leader while he was talking and roll her eyes at what he was saying. Between stops, she would engage in conversation with members of the tour and sometimes express her scorn for those who believe that the Bible is accurate and authoritative. It's no surprise, then, that the tour leader fired her at breakfast on the 3rd day, and he hired somebody else. Jewish and Arab guides come in all shapes, sizes, and viewpoints. But regardless of their personal views about the Bible, decent professional guides will keep their personal viewpoints to themselves unless they're asked, and simply talk about what the sites show, and then defer to the tour leader to interpret what this means for the people on the tour. For some reason, the guide I spoke of earlier didn't learn that lesson, or maybe she just disregarded it. So you see, it makes a huge difference what your leadership and local guides believe in terms of what you will experience. But think about this. It also makes a huge difference what you believe going into the tour. If you think the Bible is just a collection of ancient myths, then your experience is going to be very different from those who believe that it is inspired by God and accurately recorded and passed down to us. Now, those engaged in digging into ancient sites are known as archaeologists. They also come from different perspectives. I know that this is a huge oversimplification, but I think it helps to understand archaeology and Bible interpretation in general. There are 2 basic viewpoints about the Bible. These viewpoints are reflected in how scholars and archaeologists interpret what they find. There are those who tend to minimize what the Bible records as not being historically accurate, not trustworthy at all. They are called Bible minimalists. The radical minimalists don't believe that much of the Bible is true or historical in any sense. Others, in this minimalist viewpoint, think that there may be some historical value in the Bible record, but there's also a lot of mistakes and misinformation included in the Bible's text. Then there are Bible maximalists, those people who think the Bible is truthful, accurate, and reliable history. They believe that we can trust what it records and describes. So, full disclosure, I am a Bible maximalist. Might be a good question to ask your tour leader beforehand what they believe on this vital issue. So I mentioned archaeology, which is basically digging down into a site where they believe that there is a biblical city or some artifact, and then interpreting what is found. In other words, archaeologists must figure out how to make sense out of what they find when they dig. Archaeology's value is in finding and preserving things and in some basic ways of interpreting those findings. However, it has its limitations as well. So let's talk about the strengths and weaknesses of archaeology. Many archaeological sites occur as tells. On the surface, a tell just looks like a hill. But while the site may have originally been built on a hill, the top layers of the hill are actually human-made. The top of the tell was made by layers of building and destruction, rebuilding and destruction, and more rebuilding and destruction that has been built up over the centuries. So in essence, a tell contains layers of history. When archaeologists dig down into the remains of ancient buildings and artifacts, they can often determine that they may be from, say, the Ottoman period, or maybe a bit earlier from the Crusading time, or digging down a little further, they may find a Roman layer, and below that a Greek or Hellenistic layer, and even further down are layers dating from the Old Testament. But how do they know what periods the levels of destruction date from? Well, they can often tell by the layers uncovered, bits of pottery, styles of architecture. Sometimes they find written materials on clay tablets, or even once in a while they find it on parchment or even papyrus. Sometimes they find coins. But aside from the written documents, what archaeologists find are just bare facts, bare items with no explanation other than what archaeologists can guess from putting the jumbled pieces together. The bits and pieces they find don't really tell any kind of story. They're just what people left behind. So the discipline of archaeology is a bit like digging in a garbage dump and trying to interpret the history of the people who left those things behind. You get some hard data, but we're often left with a lot of questions. How did it get there? Why was it there? And so forth. But here's the key point. An archaeologist's view of the Bible fundamentally affects how they put the pieces together. Minimalist archaeologists think the Bible is unreliable as a way of interpreting the evidence. So without it, they have to guess. They don't rely on the Bible at all. They're just left with the bits and pieces. And it's telling that sometimes they use other historical documents to help them figure the data out, but reject the Bible as unreliable. So any interpretation from someone like that is going to be very different from those who believe the Bible is a reliable document that can be a valuable tool for interpreting what archaeology reveals. What are the major sites that you may see on your tour? Well, every tour is a bit different. An important place is Qumran. It is located in a very dry desert area at the northwest corner of the Dead Sea. In 1947, perhaps the greatest discovery of the 20th century that relates to the Bible was found there. You may have heard of it. It's called the Dead Sea Scroll Collection. Without going into technical detail, the ancient scrolls confirm that the copying method of the Old Testament books has been extremely careful and accurate over many centuries. It showed that what we have in the Hebrew text that we use today is very close to, if not exactly, what the original writings said. Portions of all the books of the Old Testament except for Esther were recovered at Qumran, and they date from around 1,000 years earlier than the Old Testament copies that we had had until 1947. The Old Testament copies that we were using to translate our Old Testament were from around the 900s to 1000s AD. The Dead Sea Scroll Collection was from around the time of Christ, or maybe even a century or two earlier than that. You can see several scrolls in the picture. The scrolls were carefully unwound by experts and examined to find that there were almost no differences in the copying process over more than 1,000 years. Now, the picture below is an inscription on a piece of stone made by a Syrian general who conquered the city of Dan in the extreme north of Israel around 800 BC. When I was at the city of Dan, called Tel Dan. In 2015, I heard sporadic gunfire just over the Lebanese border, only a mile or two away, so it's that close to the border. The significance of what is known as the Tel Dan inscription is that it specifically mentions the house of David, or the line of kings descended from King David. And you might ask, well, what's so unusual about that? Well, up until that discovery, Bible minimalists had claimed that the only ancient written source that even mentioned David was the Bible itself. So they reasoned that since David is not mentioned anyplace else in a way that confirms the Bible, that David was probably just a mythological figure. But then in 1993, this inscription was found among the ruins of the city of Dan, and it mentions the house of David as the kingdom that these Syrian kings, the Syrian army, defeated. So it turns out that archaeology confirms what the Bible says if we just wait long enough. Okay, with that background, I invite you to join my virtual tour of Israel. What you'll have access to are more than a dozen quick videos of various Bible sites on our 2015 trip to Israel. Now, I'll tell you how this was done. It's not done in a professional studio. It was done on the spur of the moment at the sites. So it's far from smooth, but I think it's going to be a very interesting view for you. Melinda and I were in Israel with a group of Christian leaders in January and February of that year, 2015. And as we visited the different sites, often Melinda and I would drop back from the tour for a minute or so and shoot quick videos. Melinda would use her iPhone to record me talking about the sites from my own readings and research. The videos are extemporaneous explanations of the basic things that we saw. But what I hope they'll do for you is to whet your appetite for your trip and provide some background information to help you understand what you're seeing when you get to that particular site. They may even spark questions that you can ask on your tour that you might not have thought of asking otherwise. So start this virtual tour by clicking on the links that I provide in the discussion box below this video. The first link will take you to the page on our Aspect Ministries website where we host our virtual Israel tour videos. The second link will take you to the welcome video for the series. From there, you can click on any of the videos that appear on the 3 pages of the virtual Israel tour. So welcome to our virtual Israel tour. I hope you enjoy it. I've really enjoyed leading you through this class, and by the way, I have other classes you might want to consider taking. I've also provided the link to my Aspect Academy page in the discussion box where you can access these life-changing courses, and I hope you will. We'll see you then.